Welcome to Between Over and Next with your hosts, Holli and Robert, a happily married couple who explore the space between what was, what is, and what's to come. From career changes to navigating life's uncertainties, this dynamic duo will empower you to live your happiest life at every age and stage. So, get ready because your journey with Holli and Robert starts now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Between Over Next. Hi, Holli.
Hi, Robert. Do you know that we met Oleg Maryasis 6 years ago?
I feel like I've known him my entire life.
Well, number one, he's a good guy. Number two, he really is someone who's dedicated and committed to health and well-being, importantly.
Yes, and because he's involved in cannabis, that a lot of people don't know a lot about it. When I met Oleg, I immediately felt that I could trust what he was telling me, that he really knew about the science of cannabis. And he's always been, since then, my go-to when it comes to questions about the plant, suggestions on, what CBD to use. Our first foray in being involved with him was through his brand, Lock and Key Remedies, a CBD brand where we immediately started to work in concert because of our kind of pop-up events, which gave his brand a great platform to educate people who wanted to use the plant for health and wellness and to balance their body. So I've said it a million times, there are no coincidences. We met Oleg for a reason.
He was at every single kind of pop-up event, Robert, and he will continue to educate all of you.
I can't even count the times that I've sent people to him that have had questions that I just didn't have the answer to. Our talent is in surrounding ourselves with people who know the answers. We don't profess to know all the answers, but we have really been fortunate to have so many people close to us, our inner circle of people. Someone like Oleg, who we really trust to give us the right information.
And he's invested a lot of time and money in elevating the knowledge surrounding cannabis. So you are all in for a treat for an insightful discussion on cannabis, really focusing on therapeutic benefits and importantly on harm reduction and safe use.
Yeah. So we're excited to have Oleg in the studio with us today, and even more excited that we get to introduce him to you. Oleg, thank you so much for being here today. To say that we're thrilled is purely an understatement.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about being on your podcast.
If I had to make a list of my favorite people on the planet, you'd be in my top 5.
He'd be in my top 5 too.
It's very mutual.
There are no coincidences in life. I've said this a million times. We just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
With the right person.
With the right person. When we first met, and I knew immediately that there was a connection on so many levels. We've been together like this before, not necessarily in the same space when we're recording, but you've been a part of our life professionally, personally, since the moment we met. So having you here for us is really very special. And although you are an expert in so many things, and I knew that immediately upon meeting you, why we're having you here today is to talk about, at the core, something very important and personal to all of us, the cannabis plant, and what it does for people, what it has done for us personally, health-wise, mental health-wise, professionally. But I think at the pinnacle for us is how many people on this planet have been helped and will continue to be helped by this plant. So thank you, first and foremost, for taking the time out of your schedule to share what you know with the world, because to say that it's incredibly valuable would be a vast understatement.
Thank you again so much for having me. Really honored to be here and really excited to share what I've learned over the years.
Let's start at the beginning. Oleg, tell us your personal and professional connection to cannabis.
Sure. For me, cannabis is an exit drug. I was on anxiety and antidepressant medications from age of 15 to age 30. I was on Paxil and gabapentin, consumed about 30 pounds of those drugs over those years. I was in the finance industry for most of my initial adult life. And I really enjoyed being in finance. I was financial planning, so I was working with clients and had really good relationships with the clients. But I felt that I had a bigger mission to play, and so it's kind of a calling internally that wasn't enough. I got into the cannabis space by manufacturing vaporizers. I saw that was an opportunity for people to use cannabis discreetly, conveniently. This was 12 years ago, so it was a bit ahead of time. And at the time, the market wasn't ready for it. People weren't ready for it. They weren't concentrates or cannabis extracts that were used in these vaporizers. So I went out to Colorado in 2014 for their legalization. They had just legalized it, and it was the first 420 celebration that they had, April 20th. And I was embedded with medical cannabis radio station, a local family in Colorado, with whom I spent 5 or 6 days together. I was there to sell vaporizers, basically, at these conventions that were taking place there. They were the biggest conventions at the time for cannabis. While I was there, I got to spend a lot of time on this bus where they were doing podcasts and video recording of different people who utilized cannabis to come off pharmaceutical drugs. Some came off heroin and illegal drugs. There were parents who had babies with brain tumors. There were soldiers crying about how friends that they've lost because of PTSD and suicide, and how cannabis was helping them. I heard all these stories one after the other and compressed in these days, and it was really impactful for me. I was like, wait a minute, I don't have any of these serious conditions, yet I'm on these pharmaceutical drugs that have side effects, negative side effects, and were setting me back. So that was the catalyst for me to actually come off the pharmaceutical drugs. I utilized THC at first, but even at that convention, I learned already about CBD and other cannabinoids, and later on I learned about terpenes, other compounds within the plant that are active ingredients that regulate how we feel. But as I started to learn about this, it was enough for me to say, like, hey, let me try this. And then it just started my journey of focusing on the active ingredients and our body, the endocannabinoid system, and how that all works. So that's the beginning.
I think what's interesting as you're talking about its medicinal properties, which really hadn't been looked at until very recently, historically,
Right.
over time, compared to how long the plant has been on the planet. And I think one of the things that's overlooked many times is that even though legalization is relatively new, people have been using cannabis in this country for a very long time. And what non-cannabis consumers don't necessarily understand is that this is not like alcohol. This is not like other labeled drugs, certainly in that same category, which, as we sit here today, is a Schedule I drug, right? That's listed as more dangerous as some far more dangerous
Correct.
street drugs. And I think the stigma overall kind of stands in the way of the fact that people who have been using cannabis for a very long time and would be labeled recreational users are really truly medicinal users. They're using it to create homeostasis, balance in the body. And when you consume cannabis responsibly, knowledgeably, you see those results. And I think that's why the use of cannabis in terms of how it's consumed on a daily basis. So talk a little bit about how we're moving from that legacy, and we use the term legacy, right? Not the black market, not the illegal market, the legacy market, who we need to address in a way that, listen, our pot dealers saved our lives in the years way before it was legal, in the years that the risk as a marijuana dealer was very, very high, and we've seen the results in people who are still incarcerated. So talk about that evolution, that pivot, as we come from the shadows behind the scenes to now the forefront of when you walk up and down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, you walk past the dispensary. So talk a little bit about that transition.
You're absolutely right. I like some of the key words that you pointed out. For example, responsible, to use responsibly. The cannabis use in modern times has been really associated with hippies, because in the 60s it became really cool to consume cannabis, and a lot of the association stems from that. And this is all in parallel to the fact that, for example, every single politician that's currently in power has been born during Prohibition. So what that means is throughout their lives, they never heard anything positive, especially specifically medicinally, about cannabis because of that Prohibition. Even though, like you mentioned, for thousands of years around the world, whether it's in China, India, and in other places, cannabis has been used medicinally, including in Europe as well. But because of the Prohibition, there was that reset of understanding of how this works. So one of the things to consider as well, and this is part of the evolution in cannabis, that the potency during the 60s, 1960s, was very different from potency currently.
Right.
So that's another thing that we have to take into account, because at that time, cannabis flower had about 2% THC. And right now we're up to about 30.
Right. It's
So
very, very different plant.
So because of that, there is a botanical evolution that's been, thanks to breeding, has taken place. So we also have to take that into account. But to reference the change over to the legal market, I'd say the most important part about that is that you get clean product. So in legal dispensaries, you're getting lab-tested products that are not allowed to have pesticides, heavy metals, and mold and other harmful things that in the illegal market often do take place. Not to say that all illegal products have those aspects, but when it's not monitored, you don't know what you're intaking. And when you're looking at wellness, when you're looking at reaching homeostasis, you don't want to be causing yourself harm.
Sure.
I feel like that the safety of cannabis is the biggest upside of legalization. And of course, the other one is the incarceration. You know, the people that should not be going to jail for cannabis.
The stories that you hear and the reactions of people who are uninformed find it astounding. We were talking a little bit before we got started in the fact that the medical community has no real formal training in the endocannabinoid system, which you made reference to. Do you think it's just ignorance? Do you think that it's intentional? But why has the medical community, when we have all this information at our fingertips, why has the medical community been so reluctant to embrace the positive aspects?
Ignorance is definitely a key word here. It's two types of ignorance. There's like regular ignorance of not knowing, and then there's selective ignorance by choice.
Right.
At a certain point, that for a while it was ignorance, and just not by knowing, because the research wasn't there. It's, lack of awareness. But nowadays, it definitely has become more of a selective ignorance, because there is enough research and resources to, at the very least, to bring awareness to it. Of course, we need more clinical trials and studies to hone in on the specifics of each type of condition and therapeutic use that cannabis can and eventually will have. But even before that, at least to understand that we do have the endocannabinoid system, the system of receptors within our body that's present in all the cells in our body. It's essential for a person who studies medicine and practices medicine to know and understand that system. It regulates the homeostasis, which is the internal balance of how we function. So not to be aware of that is unacceptable. And going forward, when medical practitioners and even medical schools will look back upon this time and prior times, they will be like, how were we this naive, or why were we so ignorant, and so forth. History will look backwards in a kind of a different way on how we got here, but thankfully we're evolving now.
But one of the things that struck me, and we talked about this last week when we were at CWCBE, right, which is the Cannabis World Congress and Expo, was that whole section of all of these schools offering cannabis programs. There is hope, right? We're educating now our young people, and they're realizing that this could be a real future for them in understanding this plant. So hopefully we'll start to see it in our lifetime that there is that access to education.
Bravo, Oleg. You earned your medical cannabis science and therapeutics master's degree right from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, and you just graduated this year. And what a commitment and dedication to learning more to help others. So that is so fantastic, and another reason why we feel that your position educating others and being with us today matters so much.
Thank you so much. The master's program was definitely mind-opening for me. I was going into it after already being in the industry for 10 years and already doing a lot of research on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system and the components of how it works. But every single week of the 2 years that I've been studying, every single week I was learning new things that were mind-expanding for me. So I'm super blessed to have been part of that program. It's the 4th year that they've had this program.
It's exciting because in the future, we're going to be able to help others, right, create more effective wellness products and to continue to advocate for harm reduction. So let's talk a little bit more about harm reduction and safe use, because I know that matters a lot to you. That is a big part of your mission and your values. How can individuals consume cannabis more safely?
Harm reduction is a big focus for me because I've learned in this program, it brought light to it, that there is excessive consumption often taking place for THC in particular. And this becomes an issue for the younger people for a multitude of reasons. So people who are under 21, if they're consuming cannabis, they are likely to have a higher chance of developing a cannabis use disorder, which is a condition that your body doesn't operate as well as it should. It's both your body and the brain. So there's developmental issues that could arise from that. There's certain other conditions like hyperemesis syndrome where people could develop vomiting all of a sudden. This takes place because people are consuming very high levels of THC. So the dab culture, for example, when people are using concentrates and excessively consuming every day, that's not something that should be promoted. But thankfully, there's safe ways to consume cannabis, and most of that has to do with dosing. So, for example, most research that exists indicates that for our bodies to function optimally, a person needs about 2.5 to 5 milligrams of THC per day. So it's a much smaller dose than a lot of people are consuming. If someone who's already consuming more than that, we're able to reset our endocannabinoid system just by taking a break, which is great. And our system just resets back in a matter of a week. For some people, in a matter of days. It's good to give it at least a week of a reset, and then your receptors are reset, and then you're able to be brand new a consumer again. So that would be the biggest tip, is just the lower potency aspect. And when it comes to people who are just interested in starting cannabis or curious to start cannabis, the main way to advise is start low and go slow. That's really the main lesson. Start low, go slow, because you don't need to take more than you really need to achieve your desired therapeutic effect. It's very important to customize your medicine. You really need to go in to a dispensary knowing what kind of therapeutic effect you're looking for.
It's interesting because you mentioned earlier the lab reports.
Yes.
The lab reports don't just show you that it's clean and clear of pesticides and heavy metals and things like that, but it discusses things like one of your favorites, active ingredients, terpenes, right? All of these components, there are so many in the plant. And the best part about it is the fact that for those who would like to try cannabis, there are components of the plant that you can consume that are not psychoactive, that will do nothing but make you feel better overall, right? We're talking about CBD in particular. I think about the early days of Canna Pop-Up when we were still in an area where cannabis was not legal yet in New Jersey. CBD was the savior because we were able to have our events. We were able to educate the public on the benefits of CBD. People were able to try it, sample it, but I look at it as a daily therapeutic.
We've said it's a supplement, like any other vitamin. But you know what I'm curious about? What about potential interactions with other medications? Share a little bit about that, because we want everyone out there to be as safe as possible.
Exactly. That is very important, especially for people who are taking pharmaceutical drugs. So the ones that there are most issues with are the drugs that are for blood pressure and for thinning the blood. Those drugs target the same receptors within our body as cannabis does. So that's where basically magnify the effects of the pharmaceutical drug. So if someone's taking blood thinners and they consume THC, they might get lightheaded and faint, and then you could have an injury. That would be one of the main interactions. Other than that, there's some interactions with immunosuppressants or immunoenhancers. Those drugs also target the same receptors, so you would want to avoid combining with those drugs. But a great resource is drugs.com. You could just plug in what you're taking and cannabis, and it will give you a rough idea, but you would absolutely want to speak with your doctor about using cannabis if you're taking pharmaceutical drugs, because they have their own little manuals that will guide you.
Do we think cannabis will ever replace pharmaceutical drugs in the future?
That's a big question.
I don't know. It's too much money involved, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, there are conflict of interest for sure.
Yeah.
With that said, it won't be just cannabis, right? There's a way for botanical drugs to
coexist.
To coexist would be perfect. Coexist would be absolutely perfect. There's absolutely a way to coexist. There will be a time when doctors will prescribe or advise specific botanically derived drugs over pharmaceutical drugs. So that will happen.
I mean, you have to research your medical providers, right? Doctors that are open to alternative treatments, right? We've all been in situations where doctors are very quick to write you a prescription for some pills. You hope it's not motivated by money. Let's hope it's not. But I think most of it is motivated by ignorance.
It's about having options. There are definite benefits across demographics, meaning it can help younger people, it can help older people, it can help all people. Can you share some stories do impact youth or parents of youth, because they sometimes are at wit's ends if they cannot discover something that could really help their child, especially now as we're in a more legal market? And the same thing for older adults, because there are just so many conditions, whether it be anxiety and stress and PTSD, whether it be pain, whether it be sleep. And this is for all parts of the plant to help. So share some stories that can open the eyes of others tuning in today.
Of course. Yes. So for children, it's obviously a very delicate subject. There's specific conditions like epilepsy where children have found benefit from cannabinoid-based drugs. There's a lot of research being done in this area. and it's very promising. It's just very tricky in the sense that the ratios of these cannabinoids, how much CBD, how much THC, it's very unique on a case-by-case basis. So in all those cases, it has to be done with medical professionals monitoring it. For example, one of the parents that was at a symposium conducted by our school, she also is a graduate of the program. She had a spreadsheet with every single strain that she administered to her child from the lab report of what each cannabinoid terpene ratios each one had. And by day, she would mark the results. So highly meticulously measuring that and had really positive results. People also administer it to children with ADHD, some developmental conditions that children have. There is potential benefits from cannabinoid remedies. But again, it just has to be done very carefully because children, especially with these types of conditions, are highly sensitive to these cannabinoids. So it's a very, very delicate situation. But for older population, it's definitely a lot easier to experiment and especially on sleep. Good sleep, high quality sleep is probably the biggest reason for cannabis sales right now in the dispensary that I help manage, because people have sleep issues and they do find the combination of CBD, CBN, and a little bit of THC to be highly beneficial for them.
I've never tried any of it or had it prescribed, but I think a lot of the sleep aids that are prescribed by doctors carry a lot of really bad side effects. And that would just scare the heck out of me just to begin with.
And they're addictive as well.
I don't know why the reluctance of some people to try something natural, whether it's cannabis or anything else. It's kind of the blind faith that we've put in our medical practitioners that they know exactly what to do, when in actuality, I think, and especially now where we have so many resources at our fingertips, that we do need to advocate for ourselves, that we do need to research, that we do need to look at the pamphlet that comes stapled to the pharmaceutical and look at the interactions and see what can happen and balance whether it's worth taking or not, or is there another alternative. I had firsthand evidence of this when I had my hip operation, when they gave me a fistful of opioids. You know, I'm not talking about 10 or 20. I'm talking about like 40.
Yeah.
Scary.
You know, and I didn't take one. I didn't take one.
You are associated with a dispensary now. What is your role?
I'm in charge of product selection, compliance, bud tender training, and consumer education.
At what dispensary?
NYC Bud.
Which is located where?
Long Island City.
Okay,
And
so
one of the most amazingly designed
beautiful
dispensaries. I can't wait to go.
So the New York metro area has a very large cannabis consumer population.
Like the most in the country, I think. Right.
It was West Coast, and now it's on the rise
Yes.
right here where we live. You mentioned the word bud tenders. So let's talk about their role, because they really can help tailor those cannabis products to meet individual needs. So what should consumers look for when seeking advice, and explain a little bit more about even what a bud tender is?
Sounds good. We call them buddies at the NYC Bud. The bud tender is a person who is supposed to facilitate your purchasing at a dispensary. So when you go to a dispensary, the most important thing is to know what effect you're looking to achieve. That's really the main thing. So you tell them, hey, I need help with sleep, or I just want to have a good time, or I want to relax. And you give them some sort of tips, or I have a lot of pain, I need help with some relief.
So they're cannabis advisors, in a sense.
Absolutely.
They're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
We're lucky to have you.
So one of the big misconceptions in the industry is sativa indica hybrid. Unfortunately, those words don't mean what they're associated with. They're just used to simplify kind of the selection process.
So tell everyone a little bit what that means.
So back in about 25, 30 years ago in California, some bud tenders came up with this system to tell people if it's indica, it's going to sedate you. If it's a sativa, it's going to give you energy, and hybrid is somewhere in between. But that wasn't based on any scientific anything. But it stuck, for simplicity's sake, because cannabis science is so complex. It's really hard for a bud tender to tell you more specifically. And also at the time, they didn't know that there was more to it. Now we know that it's much more complex than that. So when you're going to a dispensary, you want to kind of look past what the label says, indica sativa hybrid. Yes, it could be helpful kind of as a quick guidance, but you really want the bud tender to kind of look a little bit deeper into that, because when the plant has a certain smell, for example, it'll give you some guidance. So if something smells a little bit more piney, it's going to give you a little bit more energy. If it smells a little bit citrusy, then it's going to be more uplifting, so mood enhancing. And if it's a little stinkier, then it's more sedative. There's certain elements like that. And another element is a lot of people go into the dispensary and they say, oh, what's the strongest thing you have? Right. They say, give me the highest THC. Very large percentage of people go in for that, not understanding that that's not really what they're looking for. So that's kind of usually a wrong approach. So when you're asking for more THC, in reality, you're asking for, maximum sedation, because that's really what you're going to get with that. Whereas if you're having lower THC, you're going to have more of a euphoric feeling, which in essence, most people are looking for during consumption. These are some of the key elements, I think, that are important.
Well, thank you.
And I think what becomes important, like with anything else, is it's up to the patient, right, the consumer, to note which strains become favorites and why. You talked earlier about that spreadsheet, but some people may be listening and kind of rolling their eyes and saying, why would you do that? But when you look at the scientific breakdown and the components, if you make a note of that, you'll see there are certain consistencies there that will help you, right? Like anything else, you may like a certain type of tomato, right? And you go back to the store and you buy those tomatoes. Right. This is no different.
I know that many people will not put anything into their body or on their body unless it is FDA approved.
And there are aisles and aisles of non-FDA approved product in every drugstore and every pharmacy and store.
Can you provide an update on the status of FDA clinical trials involving cannabis, and what are the current challenges and prospects for cannabis as a medically approved therapeutic?
It's actually really interesting what's going on with the FDA. First of all, COVID made a significant impact on the way the FDA is going to be conducting clinical trials from here on. They're decentralizing the process significantly, where people don't have to go to a clinic to get the drug administered. So that's going to lower the costs of clinical trials significantly. Artificial intelligence is playing a major role right now in also lowering costs, simplifying the process, speeding up the process. Particularly to cannabis, there's a botanical drug pathway that FDA has, which is a step-by-step process to do it, to get cannabinoid-based drugs approved, which didn't exist before and is really remarkable because it allows for these variances in active ingredients, which don't exist in other pharmaceutical drugs. Other pharmaceutical drugs have this specific formula that's always replicated. Botanical drugs have this leeway, which is perfect for cannabis. And in conjunction with these new ways to do clinical trials, it really is going to make clinical trials a lot cheaper and easier to make for different cannabis manufacturers or even researchers who are not making products but just want to do research. It's going to really streamline those processes, and we're going to see really positive results that will convert into drugs. And this goes in timing with the rescheduling. So cannabis is about to be rescheduled in a matter of a year. It's about to be rescheduled to Schedule 3, a drug which will furthermore allow additional pathways for research. And I think it will make significant improvements in products, improve the efficacy of the products. There's certain technological advancements on nanotechnologies. So, for example, how to increase the bioavailability of absorption by our body so that you could take small amounts of these cannabinoids and have really positive effects for certain therapeutic conditions. So, yeah, it's super exciting.
this will ultimately help reduce the stigma and fear,
Exactly.
which is something that matters to all of us.
Science is catching up, yes.
Science is catching up. So is there anything else that we can do to help educate the public about its benefits besides what we're doing right here, right now?
This is really important. So this right here, right now is very important. Education is the most important missing element still, even with my fellow advocates. They're so interested in just sharing about this plant. They don't always take into account all the variables, which is a significant amount of variables that need to be considered for cannabis. Education, most importantly, the endocannabinoid system. So that's the biggest takeaway is people should look into this. We'll provide resources with certain links that will help you understand the importance of the endocannabinoid system. I really also want to put in a plug for one of our endocannabinoids, which is an andamide. It's a cannabinoid that our body naturally produces, and it's referred to as the bliss molecule. Our body makes it on its own. It's the best cannabinoid that we could have. It's the plant's cannabinoid, like THC. They mimic this cannabinoid, but the one that our body makes is the best one. So in order to make more of it, the way it's made, for example, is when we're smiling, when we're laughing, when we're dancing, when we're singing, when we're exercising, that cannabinoid is naturally produced. So by doing more of the things that we love and enjoy, your body's generating that cannabinoid. So that's another thing that we need to bring awareness to. But
Everyone needs more bliss, Oleg.
Exactly.
Now, let me tell you something, everybody. This man came from the Ukraine with his family in 1994. And I can't imagine our lives without him. This country is really blessed to have someone like you in our world. Because you're a family man, you're part of our pop-up, our cannabis family. You know how much family means to us. How old were you when you came here?
I was 10 years old, and 2 months ago was my 30th anniversary of being in the United States. I came from Odessa, Ukraine, right on the Black Sea, gorgeous city. And I'm super grateful for my parents to taking a leap of faith and a major pivot, because my mom was a teacher, my dad an engineer, and they had to leave everything to come here. They were the first in our family to come to the United States, which wasn't a popular necessarily decision from certain members of the family. But I'm so grateful for my parents in doing that, because if something didn't work out in that immigration process, I would be in Ukraine, either in the trenches or possibly even dead because of the war that's going on there, and I would be recruited to be fighting in it right now. So I'm super grateful to my parents and my family for bringing me here, and with that, I feel incredible responsibility to actually utilize my life to impact as much as possible, so that it makes sense why I'm here, you know.
Well, it'll be your legacy.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we are thankful that you came here and you're safe with us in the United States, but we understand the strong ties that you have for your homeland, and hopefully one day soon there can be some normalcy again and peace. But that's what we pray for. Oleg, thank you so much for being here. We could spend all day with you talking about things, and I'm sure we will have you back, because what we talk about on Between Over and Next is all about the pivot, and we are seeing that in action now, and hopefully the federal government will catch up shortly on supporting this plant. But until then, the battle continues, and we know that you're at the forefront of that. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for being with us on Between Over and Next.
Thank you so much for bringing attention to this very important topic, and thank you for having me.
I really enjoy pulling back the curtain on things that people may or may not know enough about. And I think that cannabis is evolving as we speak. There are changes in the landscape, in the legalization, in the science, in the receptivity. Oleg mentions prohibition, Robert, and I think about, why did it become illegal in the first place?
Well, it's rooted in racism, is really what happened. Generally speaking, there was a fear of immigrants to the United States, many of which were of Hispanic descent, and the United States feared that and felt that marijuana was being brought in from the South. So the government reacted much in the way the government does and created these laws that would make it a crime. And that's how they could keep people out. So the U.S. government made possession and growing of the hemp plant, cannabis, illegal, and criminalized it and used it to hurt a lot of people. And because of that, many people of color went to jail, some still in jail, and a lot of the legalization is rooted in righting many of those injustices that have happened over the course of time. So there's a lot of political issues behind this.
Those that were incarcerated, they are having some great opportunities getting into this space because this really is a new industry.
Yeah.
Especially on the East Coast.
In many legal states. But as we mentioned about going to the conference at the Javits Center to see all of those educational institutions with cannabis program in how to become an expert in cannabis so that you can work in the industry either to open a dispensary or a cultivation facility or even just to be employed as a bud tender, helping people make the right choices in the dispensary. And then so many people like us that got involved in the cannabis space in what's known as the non-plant touching aspect. Ancillary, right? So our involvement became education.
What I loved about all of the CBD brands that participated at Canna Pop-Up, I learned something every single event because of the people from behind the brands. So whether it was about the tinctures or the topicals or the terpenes and the quality of the ingredients.
Yes, and what was so fantastic about Canna Pop-Up, one of the many things that was fantastic about Canna Pop-Up, was the ability to sample products. Prior to COVID, for those of you who don't remember, food sampling and things was big, right? So that went away not only in Costco and in Trader Joe's, but it went away at Canna Pop-Up too, because people were concerned about the spreading of the virus, right? When I think about the people that would come to Canna Pop-Up, the demographic, so to speak, it was generally older. And I remember my parents coming, I think, on more than one occasion. And there's actually a picture of Oleg giving my mother some CBD tincture to sample at the event. And that's what people were doing. They were trying out, because let's say it's not inexpensive to get high quality products like that. So I think it's good to be able to, let's see what that tastes like, or will I feel something? So it was a great experience.
And not only that, all mammals have endocannabinoid systems.
Yeah.
So we even had brands that helped pets. And that was really cool stuff.
That was
but
big.
I love that Oleg brought up dosage, because I think that is always a big question when it comes to CBD or the cannabis plant. There's a different way of incorporating it into your lifestyle.
Correct.
Anything we're talking about regarding cannabis cannot prevent, treat, diagnose, or cure anything.
Correct.
It's important to say, because everybody should listen to your bodies.
Correct. It's also important, as Oleg brought up, is the contraindicators. You should always run it by your primary physician to let them know. There were those couple that Oleg mentioned about blood thinners and things like that, where blood pressure and blood thinners, where you would want to monitor. You wouldn't just want to use it. But beyond those contraindicators with other medications, this is all very safe. If you do this the right way and you see how your body reacts to it, you're okay.
I do love the tinctures. by Lock and Key Remedies. I do love the topicals. When you're at a computer all day, my neck, my shoulders, it feels so good. My lower back with the topical. I love the smell with eucalyptus and lavender, my favorite.
Post pickleball, the topicals are
And
fantastic.
we must also admit the massage oil is quite lovely. And that also has a lovely scent. And that does awaken the senses. So don't be so afraid. If you have questions, Oleg is happy to answer them and to discuss your personal needs. We're here anytime you have any questions about cannabis, any of the components of this natural therapeutic, this natural plant that we're really proud to talk about because it's meaningful and it matters. Because like Robert said during our talk with Oleg, when he went for his hip replacement, how many years ago now?
It was 2017, December 27th.
So the year before we started Kind of Pop-Up, he was in terrible pain. But I'll never forget the consults with the doctors. And they said he'd have to stop the cannabis he was using. And he said,
right.
They wanted
me to stop using cannabis and start using Xanax for my anxiety.
And Robert said no. So you have to advocate for yourself. That is a real important message.
But think about that. The medical professionals, and only because this is how they're trained or not trained, they wanted me to stop using a natural therapeutic, a plant that grows in nature, and they wanted me to change to a chemical pill.
Well, that's what they were advising. But you know what?
Addictive, dangerous.
They said okay to you.
Pill.
Just FYI.
Yeah.
They said it's okay.
Well,
it's important to disclose it.
Well,
that's important.
Yeah.
Cannabis, you can still be high functioning. You can still have more focus. There is a lot of myths, misunderstandings, misconceptions, misinformation. So trust me when I tell you, come to us and we'll empower you with information that'll make sense for you. Robert's going to show you my bracelet, which has lava beads and African turquoise. This was custom designed by me when we started Kind of Pop-Up. I like to wear my brands. I love wearing this bracelet. Dr. Peggy DeLong, who is known as the gratitude psychologist, co-designed this with me because she had a business at the time called Peggy's Midnight Creation. And it was mental health inspired jewelry. And what I loved about this particular bracelet are the healing stones. So the lava beads, which I did put on some lavender essential oils that my son brought home from France for me.
The country,
France. I put some drops of essential oils, and it is so delightful, on the lava beads. Molten volcanic rock is what lava beads are.
You say so.
And they are believed to hold healing properties of resilience and strength during life transitions and important milestones. We talk about transitions and pivots all the time. So how great. African turquoise represents letting go of negative habits that hold you back. The healing properties for this support goal setting, ambition, and confidence to grow into your best self with intention and wisdom.
If you're listening to this and you're going, what the hell are they talking about? You have to come over to the YouTube channel, which you'll find
okay, so my
on our website, so you could see it.
Yes, you'd come see it, and I will include some information in the show notes. So this piece is by who's become a friend. Her name is Shella Eckhouse, and she is a jeweler and gemologist, and she has a company called Kind Fine Jewelry, which I will include the link in the show notes. I love this. This is a cannabis leaf cutout disc necklace in sterling silver on hemp rope. Shella has a passion for jewelry, natural beauty, and the cannabis culture. And also, like me, feeling high on life. And that's how I feel when I wear this necklace, because it is playful, it is elegant, and I love wearing it.
You know, I use those two descriptive words in my high school yearbook under my picture, playful and elegant.
I think actually together we are playful and elegant.
Who's who?
It depends on the moments, Robert.
I guess.
And at this present moment, I am so grateful for the power of us. of sharing content that will potentially help you live your happiest, healthiest, important, healthiest lives.
I agree.
So thank you for joining us today.
And thank you to Oleg for being a part of our podcast experience here at Between Over and Next. We really do appreciate all that Oleg has shared with us and all of our listeners through the years. He'll continue to do that. We're really grateful for that.
And the cannabis conversation is sure to be continued.
Without a doubt. So thank you to everyone for listening to Between Over and Next, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Between Over and Next. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it meaningful and insightful.
If you value it to be worthwhile, please share it with your friends and family.
We would really appreciate it if you could take a moment to write a review for us. Your feedback will help us continue to create content that resonates with you.
And don't forget, in the show notes, you can find all the relevant links mentioned in this episode, from accessing free downloads to visiting our website and more.
If you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Simply send us an email. Our email address is hello@hollyandrobert.com. We're always excited to connect with our listeners.
So until next time, thank you again for joining us on Between Over and Next.
Thank you for listening to Between Over and Next, the podcast that navigates the twists and turns of life with courage, laughter, and a whole lot of inspiration. Tune in every Tuesday to hang out with Holli and Robert on your favorite podcast platform. Visit hollyandrobert.com and follow them on social media to ignite your passion and fuel your dreams.